Hello and welcome to another Search Engine Journal webinar. Today we are joined by Srikant Lanka of iQuanti, who's going to be talking to us about paid search in a cookieless world. Are you ready? Srikant, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and iQuanti before we get into some housekeeping tips?
Thanks, Heather. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the attendees, wherever you are. I am currently in India, a little late, but super excited to be here. My name is Srikant Lanka, and I'm the SVP for Digital Solutions at iQuanti. At iQuanti, I head our practice, which primarily focuses on omni-channel solutions for our global clients. iQuanti is a is a digital marketing firm which has combinations of both an agency and provides digital solutions for our clients, and primarily around acquisition economics. Pre-iQuanti, I spent close to a decade at Google, wherein I was involved in different roles in finance, strategy, campaign management, and most recently as the head of programmatic advertising. I also am passionate about teaching, so I spend quite a bit of my time teaching digital marketing at business schools. And I'm super excited to be here and hope the session is useful for you guys. Heather, back to you.
Great. So for those of you who have webinared with us before, you will notice that this is a different platform. So if you experience any technical difficulty, please use the chat box to ask. And there are separate tabs for chat and the Q&A. So take a second to get familiar with those. They're in the upper top right of your screen. So chat is where we'll also monitor the chat and launch any polls. So we do have a couple polls for everyone today. And the Q&A, of course, is for the questions. And as you know, if you've been to one of our webinars, we do have a Q&A section at the end of the presentation. So, as you're learning and taking in this information, ask for any clarification. Chances are you're not the only one thinking about it, so don't be shy. And we'll do our best to link to any resources or tools in the chat, but if we miss one, don't hesitate to ask, and then we'll make sure that we throw that in there. And they'll also be included in the recap email that you'll get after today's presentation. And one last thing, please stick around after the everything is after the presentation, right? Please stick around for a short survey. Then this information really helps us gauge what works for you and how we can make SEJ webinars more useful. And lastly, you'll receive the full recording, so watch your inbox for that. And with that, that's enough for me. Srikant, it's all yours, and I'll be back a little bit.
Thanks, Heather. So let me start with why this topic, right? And more importantly, why now? Deprecation of third-party cookies has been at the forefront of our discussions, both internally and also with our clients over the past one plus years, across geographies and across our clients and industries, right? We work primarily with finance, retail, and travel clients. We've been also writing and speaking about it, and we can share our POV to whoever is interested. But for today's topic, here is what I'm looking at presenting / discussing with you all. So I want to understand, share with you a little bit of the privacy landscape, the evolutions that are happening, what's changing. And I call it cookieless and privacy because there's quite a lot of interlink amongst them. The second one is what's the impact on the overall digital ecosystem? What's happening from an advertising capability perspective? What's the impact from channel perspective? And the third one is what should search marketers do, right? And this is important because you are here to understand more about what are tactics that you need to look at, what are things that you need to look at from a cookieless perspective, and how do you begin your journey. Moving on to the first section, which is about the evolving privacy landscape, right? The landscape here is continuing to evolve, and we as marketers, we need to keep pace. And this is divided into a few sections that I want to talk about. A user perspective, what's changing, from a regulatory perspective, what's changing, and from a advertiser perspective / marketer perspective and platforms perspective. So the first one is, what is the customer mindset in this? What has been changing in that? Users are continuing to understand and evaluate the pros and cons of sharing privacy consents. In the past, there was too much data that was being shared without the user knowledge, leading to a high level of skepticism. This, in my view, is an interesting paradox. Users want personalization of content, ads, while at the same time, they are not necessarily keen on sharing data. A recent survey done by BCG Google highlighted this. 66% were keen on personalization, whereas at the same time, 50% of them did not want to share data. As marketers, we've been very tuned to using custom data, using client data to figure out how do you personalize some of this. But right now, we're at an intersection of interesting times of trying to understand how do you provide that without the data that's coming along with in the cookies that is there. From a cookie landscape perspective, Google pushed the Chrome Google pushed the Chrome browser to stop sharing third-party cookies. This was not the first one. In previously, we saw Firefox and Safari also do this. We also know that Google has been testing out with different initiatives and how do we then connect its privacy sandbox towards making the cookieless world better. That's the second change that we're seeing. And if you look at the third change, we also are looking at a lot of changes from GDPR, CCPA. This is things that you all are aware of. But in addition to those, you're also seeing regional laws, right, leading to higher tech changes. In the US, California law was the first one, then came out Virginia. Also, it's not just limited to Europe and to US. We're also seeing these changes happening in Asia, with India, with Singapore and China following suit. In addition to this, one of the key changes that's happening is iOS is also giving more power back to the users with restricting capabilities, and that kind of hurts some of the larger MarTech and DSP players. So this is a nutshell of the kind of changes that we're seeing. But if you look at it from a time box perspective, this started in 2018. The first instances of the GDPR law going into effect was in May 2018, and continuing Safari and then Firefox announcing its own tracking and protection. And then more recently, Google joining the party with announcing that they're going to block third-party cookies. While Safari and Firefox were early adopters of it, with Google doing the same thing about third-party cookies, blocking it from Chrome, it became more important for everybody to started taking notice, because Google has had a much bigger share of the market from a browser perspective. And as recently as last week, Google dropped some of its changes because it's changing very fast. This lists roughly 13, but this is not the end all and be all. There's a whole lot of changes that other players in the market, other publishers, other platforms are working in. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of what's happening in the whole space. So from your perspective, on a scale of 1 to 5, how ready do you think you or your organization feel in the performance marketing space ready to work in the cookieless world? Do you feel completely clueless, or you're completely ready?
Well, I feel like, we're somewhat ready here at SEJ. But for any of those of you who out there, if you're not sure where the poll is, if you go to the chat and then you go to the open tab underneath chat, that open poll, that's where you can go ahead and submit your answer. In Streetcamp, we've got, so far, we're neck and neck with 34% saying they're somewhat unprepared and 32% saying they're somewhat ready. So everybody's kind of like right in that middle ground. We'll let a few more people jump in, and I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. And yeah, we ended up with 38% saying they were somewhat unprepared and another 33% saying they're somewhat ready.
Cool. So it's in the middle, right? So everybody's aware of it, but not necessarily fully ready. And hopefully things that we talk about today will help you feel more prepared or more in control of what's happening. So moving on to the second part of the conversation that we wanted to have, the changes that are happening in the privacy / cookieless ecosystem have implications not just for paid search, but across the whole ecosystem. If you think about it, what are the kinds of changes that are happening? The first one is ID resolution. This is primarily the capabilities that has on ad capabilities. You are able to connect identities across channels and devices. This is going to become much more difficult. The second change, if you think about, is targeting. As users are going to move towards more first party and then limit third party data, your targeting capabilities are going to get less refined, and the way I've heard it phrased just like it's not going to be as sharp as it was in the past, which is true. And the third one, if you look at from a capability impact, is around reach and frequency. Your advertisers will not be able to track and manage some of the reach and frequency that was there previously, and you will not be able to manage your campaigns in a better way. The fourth change that we see from an impact is around measurement and attribution. If you think about digital marketing as a whole ecosystem, measurement was one of the key things which made digital much better than, let's say, a traditional marketing space. And now, with measurement at risk in some ways, you have a lot of questions that are getting asked. Conversion and user journey tracking is going to get a little more difficult. Last touch, which was some things that we started moving away from, looking at last click to more a data-driven attribution, that's going to be not necessarily fully attributable. You have to have some of those concerns. And similarly, you don't necessarily have enough insights on cross-platform or multi-touch credits. The next one is on fraud detection. As channels become more focused on first party data and use group targeting instead of one-on-one personalized targeting that we used to have before, what we see potentially happening is fraudulent sites, bots, click farms could replicate some of these behaviors, and then that leading to some amount of fraud that needs to be managed. So these are at a meta level some of the capabilities which are going to get impacted. And then if you think about from a channel perspective, we started thinking about how do different channels will be impacted with the cookieless world. The first one is around programmatic display. This, in our view, is one of the ones which is going to be most impacted. And let me just move on. Yes. So programmatic display is going to be the most impacted one. We have issues with reduced options of high quality audiences that DSPs can provide. We see size of audiences going to go down with user consent getting reduced. People will not necessarily always click on those yes buttons that you have on the banners. Similar audiences can be created so easily because of restrictions. We feel that remarketing and sequential messaging will also be more restricted, and we see reduced third-party segment options that are there. So we see programmatic display to be significantly impacted. And then when we come to the next one around paid social, this is Facebook has a little bit of an advantage compared to the other social channels because it's own walled garden. However, with ITP bringing down the cookie lifespan, which will limit its Facebook's dynamic retargeting and attribution capabilities, we feel that the size of the audiences will get reduced due to user content. We also see that with Facebook analytics no longer being available, the campaign data with pixel data, which used to connect well, that's going to be hampered. So overall, paid social will have a little bit impact in the mid bucket. And the last one is paid search, which is what you guys are all here about. In some ways, it has the least amount of impact. That's the good news. But because of the size of paid search, the amount of money that all of us spend on paid search, even a marginal impact on paid search will be significant amount of dollars that you have to spend, that you have to worry about if you lose efficiencies and stuff. There is action that you still need to take to make sure that your paid search campaigns continue to be more effective. The auction, we see that it's going to get more intense because of programmatic and social channels being less effective, and most of the money shifting to paid search. We see higher CPS happening in some ways and more competition for common terms. The second one is cross-channel attribution will be an issue. You will not necessarily be able to connect all of the dots across the whole user journey, and that will lead to inefficient attribution. Definitely limited use of first-party data because of what you can provide, and your targeting is going to take a little of a hit. And similarly, retargeting also will take a hit from a paid search perspective. Now, with these amount of changes that you're seeing, especially as Google's Chrome browser is getting driving some of these, Google has started thinking about how can we respond, right? And they came up with a set of proposals that solve some of these problem statements that we have talked about. The idea is for the privacy sandbox is to replace third-party cookies with a set of proposals which will provide anonymous browsing. And also it has engaged with W3C to validate some of its thinking, right? There has been a little adoption, not as quick adoption of some of these initiatives on the ad tech ecosystem, but that's a journey that Google will have to go through. So let me just quickly walk through some of these proposals that they have. The first one is Topics API. With Topics, the Chrome browser will learn about your interests and it'll from around the web, and it'll keep the data for roughly around 3 weeks, and then restrict the number of topics. It'll help you with increasing targeting. The second one that Google has, which is the second from the right bottom, it's called Turtle Dove. It's a solution that Google has created primarily to solve the retargeting issue, which is currently done with cookies. Instead of cookies, Google starts using Turtle Dove. The third one is Trust Token API. If you look at it from the top on the right side, it is primarily intended to combat the fraud that we were talking about. And the two bottom ones are around attribution and reporting, primarily to help with impression reach without cross-site tracking, and also to look at it as to how many users to action on an ad, helps with measuring ad performance around reach and impressions, and also attribution. So those are some of the changes that Google has been trying to make in the privacy sandbox. The interesting bit is we're only talking about the changes that Google is making. Every other platform, every other MarTech player is also doing a lot of changes around the identity space. But this is related to browsers and Google linking to those browsers, so it's important. But just as an example, Turtle Dove is Google's solve for retargeting. But Criteo, which is another retargeting player in the market, has its own alternative to how Turtle Dove is going to work. And the interesting bit is all of these looks like they're bird names. So Criteo continued with the same trend, and they have a bird called Sparrow, which is an alternative to Turtle Dove. And if you think about search, the three things that we feel from a Google's privacy sandbox which will affect search are the Topics API, which is linked to targeting, Turtle Dove, which is linked to retargeting, and attribution reporting, which is going to solve for conversion measurement and attribution. So these are the key ones that in the privacy sandbox that Google has worked with is that are affecting paid search. Any thoughts that you guys feel more excited about from a privacy sandbox proposal perspective? Heather?
I am looking, and I don't have that one in the queue.
Okay. Let's skip that.
Let's use the chat. Let's use the chat. Okay. So any privacy sandbox proposals you're most excited about? And we can absolutely use the chat for that. So, okay, so there's a good question from Andre. So what is a privacy sandbox? So do you want to elaborate there a little bit?
Sure. So privacy sandbox is the initiative that Google is taking, is to come up with a set of initiatives, like I was mentioning, which will help with providing anonymous browsing. And this kind of replaces third-party cookies. And the way they're doing it is coming up with a set of initiatives that I've highlighted here that will solve for targeting, solve for retargeting, solve for measurement, solve for fraud, and all of that initiatives.
Great. So, and that was a great explanation. So in here, we've got people saying, they think the topics, Turtle Dove, attribution API. Yeah.
Cool. That's exciting. Yes, I'm definitely excited about some of the ones that are there. But let's look through what we think are changes that will happen in the paid search space. So we hypothesize that paid search is going to get much more expensive. What should marketers do? Targeting will not necessarily be as granular. Retargeting will need to be completely reimagined. Measurement will need to be reconsidered with not just attributable data, but also some observed data is going to be much lesser. Modeling will be much higher. If you think of this in the paid search landscape, other channels have it much worse. we hypothesize like a flight to safety, more ad dollars coming to paid search, despite its challenges. However, there are a few tactics that we feel will work in the new normal. And here is a list of what we think are tactics that you all need to be aware of. So 7 tactics for you guys for 7 days of the week. First one, the new focus on efficiency. How do you think about it? More from a personalization, maximizing the potential of your first party data. Can't stress on that much. It's super important. Focus on ROAS. Still see a lot of folks looking at CPA models or cost per models. Leveraging paid search for mid funnel. This is where you think about how do I make sure that I'm not all competing in the lower funnel intense auction, but moving up a funnel. Maximizing the potential of GMPs. This is an interesting one because we see a lot of our clients not doing it, but there's also a reason for why we have it here. The sixth one is create a long-term strategy for the MarTech or ad tech stack that you're using, and then solve for measurement, right? So these are a set of 7 things that I wanted to leave you guys with for actioning as you think about from a cookieless perspective and from a paid search perspective. Let's go on to the first one. Basically, if you think about it, like I was mentioning early on, personalization is key, right? For everybody to have a higher engagement with your users. We feel smarter ad copies will increase landing page relevance. It will lower your costs and also improve your conversions. How do you do it? The way we envision it happening is to completely adopt responsive search ads. If you're not doing it, Google is forcing you to do it. It will allow for greater relevancy through dynamically created combinations, and then which are aligned to users. It's an ML-driven model that Google has. The second one is think about location insertions, personalizing ad copies to attract users to locations, and also through DKIs, dynamic keyword insertions. Some of you guys are already doing it. If not, use that if possible. The third one is think about ad customizers so that you can insert different fields dynamically so you can update your ads. And then the last one is dynamic search. Dynamic search ads. Dynamic search ads will allow the content, your site content, to be used for generating ad copy. These are set of things which will not necessarily make it as personal, but will help you personalize your creatives to your users. The other one, 2 things that I'd leave you with is split your campaigns. One for folks who have first-party audience, where you have first-party audience data, and then you can personalize that. And for the second one, use this approach. Let's assume you have more female demographic for retail, or for specific services for clients who looked at your website. You can definitely use that much more than using this. But this primarily is an approach that you can use for when you don't have much first-party data. And special call out for advertisers or marketers who are limited by compliance or legal teams. Have a chat with them. Explain to them what is approvable, what is not approvable. I know it's not easy. We have seen that with a different bunch of our clients, but you have to work on it to make it more personalized. Otherwise, it's going to be a little inefficient. The second tactic from our perspective is to look at first-party data potential, right? We feel we have seen at a bunch of our clients, first-party data is severely underutilized. It's because of a lack of robust data infrastructure, unclean data, organizational silos, which all lead to inefficiency. And you don't necessarily have a good view of your first-party customer data. Some industries, some sectors are better than others, but overall, at a meta level, we feel that this is a gap. We often see that data sources are things that are not necessarily used, right? For example, you might skip out on transaction data. You don't necessarily look at partner data. All of these provide significant behavioral insights, right? 50% of the clients that we have spoken to have started working on it. They started adopting it. They understand the importance of it now. But have a unified, customized view of your customer, which includes product, which includes financial data, which includes transactions, web behavior, app behavior, anything that you can think of, and put them all into then modeling for cross-sell segments or remarketing segments or building lookalikes or even negative target segments. If you know that some set of people are not necessarily useful as good targeting segments for you, stop using them or have a negative targeting for those guys. And when we worked on it, we look at it not just from doing that data modeling and having a rules-based, a rules engine approach, but rather building out a machine learning-based approach. So this kind of helps you with building out increased attributes. Like on the left side of the screen, what you see is how we can enhance the data collection that's there and use different attributes that you can see in GA360 and stuff. And then you apply BigQuery and ML to actually create lookalikes. You then build out content scores, and you can build out predictive scores, which is then going to help you determine as to which segments are going to be more useful for you. You then are able to activate on any of the channels, be it Google Ads, be it search ads, or display ads. This is the second tactic that we are proposing. The third one is about focusing on ROAS. This is interesting because we usually see that bunch of our clients have moved from TCPA to TROAS. E-commerce clients definitely, but other industries are a little slower. The challenge that we hear more often is we don't necessarily know our lifetime value of our customers or profitability of our customers. We feel that having a perspective on that is going to be important. What we have seen in that journey is you need to pivot from conversions on TCPA to more profitability at a segment level if you can't necessarily go to individual user level, and then move on to profitability at a customer level. The approach that we have taken is you use underlying customer analytics, right? Use segment analytics to understand profitability for different segments that we have created in the past, and then use predictive analytics to figure out what is the profitability one at the time of approval or the time of your click or your form fill, and then later. This is important for clients who have delayed conversions. Like if you have a good understanding of your conversion right at the moment that somebody is filling a form, which is great, you can then connect it to ROAS. But sometimes when you are not sure about how long, whether the customer coming in is going to be profitable or not, and it's going to take you longer to figure that out, then it becomes an important one to use analytics to figure out and model whether the user is profitable or not. So we have a quick case study at the bottom. It's a one-liner, but I'll just give you a snapshot of what we did. So as a large banking client of ours, they can't leverage TROAS because their measure of profitability comes roughly around 6 months after an account has been opened. So what did we do, right? So for these deposit customers, we leverage like instant funding. So you have different options, either it's instant funding or delayed funding. So we used instant funding as a predictor for long-term profitability. And then we use that data pulled back into real-time status. And then we had a score of funding behavior, whether they will be profitable or not. They had a measure. The bank had a measure of what was profitable. And using that signals, we drove roughly around 1.8x improvement in balances, and then 1.9x improvement in ROAS. From a search perspective, a 2x improvement in ROAS is pretty good. So this was something that we did when we worked on with a client of ours. The next one is around mid-funnel search. So this is the fourth tactic that we see is important. Primarily, as I was mentioning before, most digital channels will become less efficient because of cookies and privacy, both of those. Tracking will become difficult in the third-party world, in the post-cookie world. Higher traction, a higher push towards lower funnel. And all of these will lead to increased competition and CPAs, right? What can you as a search marketer do? Think about shifting budgets to mid-funnel search for more exposure for your prospects. Go after the right mid-funnel terms. Most of you guys have heard this. I'm going to repeat it. But the user queries are changing on a regular basis, right? More often than not, you see more and more long-tail queries coming in. So that means that your query basket is changing. But if you talk to marketers, your keywords that you are going after is very limited to your head terms. So think about what are the long-tail terms that you want to go after. Don't necessarily go after your aggregator space which look at heavy keywords such as best of or compare our top 10 kind of a thing. So those are mostly aggregated terms. But if you think about mid-funnel terms, there's a huge opportunity that's there. Experiment with multiple campaign messaging. Think about what is the right message that you want to share for your lower funnel keywords and your mid-funnel keywords. Like I was mentioning, use DDA if you have analytics, or if you're using any modeling for measuring your whole user journey. Use data-driven attribution. Build landing pages and customize experiences which are different. And then, if you can, layer first-party data on top of this. So we feel this is an interesting tactic and it's important. And whereas we have spoken to a few of our clients, there is value in thinking about not just focusing on lower funnel but on mid funnel, because it's going to be an improvement over some of the other spends that you're seeing elsewhere. The next tactic from our perspective is leveraging GMPs to the maximum. So, as I was mentioning, this cookieless world and privacy is in some ways leading to a closed ecosystem, if you will, without a unique common identity which you can share across walled gardens. Think of Google as one walled garden, think of Facebook or Amazon as other walled gardens. If you're not necessarily able to share data across these walled gardens, you will have a little bit of an issue. But if you think of search, right? From a search platforms perspective, Google is one of the largest search platforms. And then most of the challenges that we're talking about around measurement, attribution, ID resolution, they don't necessarily exist if you're looking at it from just the walled garden perspective. And then you need to understand what is it that makes sense for you. Are you ready to give so much control of your media marketing dollars to Google? Are you not ready to give it? Are you okay with living with a inefficient measurement methodology that might come about in some of these? Are you okay with your channel spends being disconnected or disjointed and not having a unified journey, at least in the short term? Those are all questions that you need to think about. But if it makes sense for you, and if you see 80-70% of your spends being on the whole Google stack, our recommendation is to just leverage the whole GMP. And there are a few things that are happening in the GMP space which are interesting and useful as well. What we see is when you can connect Analytics 360, which is one of the products that's there in the GMP stack, you are able to bring down your Google platform data, campaign manager data, display video 360, search ads 360, or even some of your other platform data, which is click-through tagging, like social data, organic search, other DSPs which are connected to Analytics 360. Having those data connected together, you are then able to build out models. You're able to look at conversion path reports that show sequence of interactions that are happening. You are able to build model comparison reports, which will allow you to compare how different attribution models impact the valuation of your marketing channel. You get a sense of which channels are important. So all of these are enabled through Analytics 360, and with search being such a high spend of your lower funnel acquisition spend, that might be an approach that might work for you. And continuing on the same token, right? Like we were mentioning, Google has been continuing to think about how do we make their stack better, and they have built on 3 key modes in the analytics space. The first one is called the Google consent mode. Basically, it allows you to adjust how the Google tags behave, and based on the consent of the users, you can indicate whether consent has been granted for analytics or for ads cookies. And this is going to change. The Google tags will adapt, and then you can use that for modeling conversions. The second one is around Google measurement protocol. So you can use the measurement protocol to send events that are happening outside your standard user interaction. You can tie offline to online behavior. And they can also send data from both client and server to them using the measurement protocol. The third one, which is called GA4, Google Analytics 4, it is a privacy-centric platform that Google has built right now, enhanced, and it could work with or without cookies. Right, that's the key thing that they feel more excited about. And using machine learning and statistical modeling, it actually fills in gaps on attribution, and also about conversions which you can view, and some of the conversions which need to be modeled. So these are a few things that are happening in the GMP space, which makes it more amenable, and then helps you drive more efficiency if you think about it. The next one is, how do you think about it from a long-term perspective? What we have seen is integrating your ad tech stack, your data flows, is going to be tantamount for in preparation for the cookieless world, not just for search, but any of it. I could use this and speak about it for display, speak about it for social, and all of the channels. What we are saying is, think about first party data, focus on gathering that data, user provided data, other channels of data. Are they all integrated into a central place? Are you using like a CDP or a DMP? And then move towards a CDP if you want to integrate some of this data. Build a measurement across your whole stack, upper funnel, lower funnel. Leverage data clean rooms. This is some of the new ones that Google has started talking about. Google has its own called Ads Data Hub. Facebook has its own data clean room. Amazon has its own data clean room. These things help you look at measurement in isolation in the whole stack that they have. You're able to connect their data with your own first party data, which you need to upload. But again, it's a choice that you have to make whether you want to do it or not. But overall, this provides a view of how you can think about an integrated ad tech or ad tech slash data flows for getting ready for the cookieless world. Moving on to the next tactic. This is one of the ones which I was mentioning as being the most important one, and we left it for the last. But primarily, measurement is going to become more and more complex, and it's going to be driven not just by observed data but also model data. If you are a senior leader at any of the firms that you're working at, and you want to think about measurement, what you saw in the past versus what you see in the future is going to be a little different. You have different solutions, but I feel, at least in the short term, your measurement is going to become less interesting and more expensive, and you'll have a lot of questions around this. So there are 4 things that we see as options for looking at measurement, specifically from a paid search perspective. The first one, which is obvious, is the whole Google's enhanced conversion tracking. This minimizes reliance on cookies, right? It kind of says we can do without cookies for some time. It uses modeling, ML modeling. It helps conversion tags to capture hash customer data, and then it applies that against Google logged in data. And clients of ours who have implemented this enhanced conversions, they've seen conversion rates actually improving, which is a good thing. The second one is, think about attribution within closed ecosystems. I spoke about GMP, but any of the closed ecosystems that you have, they don't necessarily allow data sharing outside, but even in itself, use aggregated user level data and then see if you can look at measurement from attribution models, and which are going to be not as custom or as exhaustive as some of the ones that you might have seen. But these are a good starting point. Like GA or Ads Data Hub will be a good starting point of thinking about attribution within the closed ecosystem. The third one is around incrementality. So this is something that we think will be useful for relatively smaller advertisers. This is going to be about finding the causal impact of an ad. We want to look at what is the effect of showing an ad to a potential new customer. We call it as incrementality, but it actually helps you measure effectiveness. This is a quick one. You just need to implement it, have a measure of it, and then see where do you want to spend your next dollar. And that's the approach you take towards incrementality. The fourth one is around media mix modeling and multi-touch attribution. This is the holy grail nirvana. It helps quantify the impact of multiple marketing options that you have on your business goals. And then it helps you understand how each marketing input contributes towards your sales, towards your end output or business objectives that you're tracking. And it also helps analyze offline data. So we have a case study that we have to share with you, which you can download if you're interested, primarily wherein we worked on building a hybrid MTA model. And then we said, how can you future-proof it for a cookieless world? So these are a set of tactics that we think are relevant as we think about paid search in the cookieless space. One of the key questions that people keep asking me as we go through this or talk about it to our clients is, this all is interesting. Some of this we are doing, some of it we are not doing. But how do you get started on this? Like, how do you start on this journey? How do you build a foundation which is going to be ready for you in the future? How do you make it work? And the key one, from my perspective, is around the maturity that you have, the digital maturity of your organization, of your ad tech, martech space, of how you think about it from your attribution models and all of that will be key. And what we then did is we said, okay, let's build out a step, a process step from low maturity to high maturity, right? So the key one is, like I mentioned, maximize your first party data at the lowest level. The second one is focus on efficiencies with keyword expansions, ad copies, landing pages, and all of that. Onboard offline and conversion data to be used better into your paid search campaigns. This is going to drive efficiency. Breaking organizational silos. This is easier said than done. But primarily, if you have a brand team, you have an acquisition team, you have an analytics team, you have a tech team, you all need to come together to work right now, especially as the whole cookieless ecosystem is changing. Uh, have a connected marketing and data ecosystem, implementing any stack that you like, any stack which might be custom or which might be an off-the-shelf stack. Adobe, Salesforce, all of these guys have stacks. GMP stack I spoke about, but any of those stacks. Focus on ROAS. That's independent of the cookieless world, but it becomes more and more important because you will get questioned on it as soon as your CPS start going down. Solve for measurement and attribution to increase efficiencies of your media budgets as much as you can. And then as you do this, you will figure out which channels work, which channels don't work. Our hypothesis on paid search, some of the stuff that we mentioned might not necessarily be the same as to what you are seeing in when you implement those changes. Optimize your channels and don't just assume that because we heard at a webinar or this is what we've seen, this might be the right thing to do. Just optimize your channel tactics to figure out what is the most important impact that you have. So in summary, let's do a quick poll. Like, do you feel better, ready, more ready, less ready about paid search?
So
Because when
we actually have this one, Street Can't, but I like this. I like that we're closing with asking if they feel more ready than they did. So again, you can find it under polls and then under the open tab. And so we've got about 66% saying they feel somewhat readier.
Okay.
So let's give it another minute or two. Anything else you want to close out before we get to the Q&A?
Yeah, a couple of things, right? So let's just finish the poll and then I'll just have a few takeaways before we open for Q&A.
So we got about 50% response, right? So let's see. So let's close that. So it's under the close tab. So here we can see that 63% said they are somewhat readier, 30% said not really, and 1% said let's talk. So, but we've got 9% sitting at definitely readier. So, you helped 9% of them feel a little better about going back to their desk after this.
That's great. So quick reminders for you guys. There is a lot of uncertainty. What I showed you in the first early parts of the deck with roughly around 13 changes that happened over the course of 18 months or after 2 years, 3 years, that's not it. There's more and more changes coming about. You cannot control all of them. You just need to have a set of actions that you take so that you come out ahead. These are 3 key takeaways for you guys. Keep a close eye on the latest developments that are happening in the industry. The sandbox initiatives that we spoke about, some of you guys didn't even know about it, which is fine, but you need to know as you think about having a more analytics-led paid search campaigns. Test out alternatives. Understand what works for you. How can I target better? How can I look at measurement? What are the data that I can use? Discover the best channels that work for you. And then don't necessarily wait for the end of the cookieless world to come about. Let's do it earlier on and start building a robust infrastructure. Have that so that you are able to comply with any changes that are coming about. So that's the takeaways that you have from our perspective. And open for Q&A, and I want to introduce my colleague, Senior Director at iQuanti, Matt Boland, who's going to be joining me on the Q&A to help me answer any of the questions that I might not necessarily know. So open for questions that you have.
Perfect. Well, I will tell you, Shrikant, that was a great webinar. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the Q&A as you were going through it, but we definitely got a lot of questions. So we have about 15 minutes left, so we'll get to as many as we can, but might be a good way for you to follow up with people afterwards. So let's get into it. Jason asks, is TurtleDove in GA yet? And if so, how do we access it?
I don't think TurtleDove is in GA yet. It's still being betaed. You can look up the blogs that Google has written, the whole privacy sandbox. They are testing out a few of them. I don't think TurtleDove is in beta yet, but you can read through to say what is TurtleDove. I can find the link and share it with you guys, which Google speaks about in terms of what is TurtleDove and how does it work. And it uses a combination of intent as well as a retargeting kind of a combination to actually think through to say what is TurtleDove in this space, but it's not necessarily ready.
Okay, and that was one of the earlier questions as you were talking through that. So Maish asks, how do third-party attribution players fit into the sandbox model like CallRail?
So let me take a stab, and Matt, maybe add if you have any thoughts. So in the sandbox, they don't necessarily fit into the Google privacy sandbox. They fit in once you have an identity. One of the challenges that we spoke about early on is having a clear identity across once cookies go away, like whatever that identity is. Things that are being thrown around are phone number, a combination of phone number, email address, some of those. Those are all personal identifier data, right? If you have one which the industry agrees on, those might be things, IP address even, might be things that will be shared. But the sandbox only is as much as data that Google is willing to share, and I don't think PII data is something that they'd be keen on sharing with other partners. Matt, anything else from your side?
No, I don't think so. I think, it's going to be tough for something like emails or phone numbers to get shared across different people. So I think that's part of the beauty of Google at the moment, is that they have that data. And part of the problem as well is that of these walled gardens is that within the walled garden, there's quite good data, but across the different gardens, that's where the problems are. So I'm not sure what the solution is going to be to that just yet.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about remarketing, because there was definitely some chat back and forth between Francesca, Jason, and Elliot. Francesca thinks that remarketing is dead. Jason says it won't die, but it will evolve. Francesca says that she's scared and, what marketers aren't. And then Elliot says, remarketing will get better. Too much set it and forget it out there right now. So from your perspective, what is remarketing going to look like, and how can people prepare for that?
Remarketing is here to stay, right? It's one of those which, if you do it well, you are able to leverage and you're able to get significant returns. And the key to doing it well is not necessarily looking at remarketing based on just some signals, but also adding in your first-party data, overlaying multiple signals to make your remarketing lists much richer. Once you do that, then you can apply. The challenge that we're going to face in going forward is in a cookieless space, how does an advertiser then connect with a remarketing list and then share it with a different space wherein the user might be going later. So that's the challenge that Google has right now. I don't know if that's going to get better, but clearly, if you think about it, remarketing will continue to stay, at least on the way I look at it. Matt, anything else?
Just going to add that on search for Google, because they've got signed in data, they've got a bit of a benefit there with about how they can track users and see what they're doing. And even on search, a lot of the time people think you don't really want to do remarketing because people are using keywords to tell you what they want. But there's still instances where knowing that audience and what they're interested in can help when they're coming back and searching on other terms that maybe their intent is a little bit hidden. So for instance, if they're coming back searching on brand terms, then having those remarketing lists added on mean that you can change the ad copy, so you can customize a little bit more, which I think Shrikant mentioned earlier in the presentation. So definitely within search, remarketing will still be possible, and having that benefit of knowing what they've done before means you can change bids, budgets, and customize the messages for them as well.
Great. So Bill asks, what impact are you seeing in organizations' marketing departments? And so, somebody had asked about software, so that's one of the next questions that we'll get to. But new processes, design, hiring skill sets, it all seems to make the cost of marketing seem incredibly more expensive. So what all are you seeing out there?
Definitely. So some of the stuff that we are seeing, right? Marketers across the spectrum are sitting up and taking notice. In some ways, the whole COVID kind of leapfrogged or moved the digital adoption to a much higher level. Having said that, pretty soon comes about this whole changes that we're seeing with cookieless and with CCPA and all of that bits. So digital becoming more important, at the same time, not necessarily as refined as it used to be. So marketing teams across clients that we spoke about are sitting up and taking notice. They are responding to it in some ways like a wait and watch kind of a thing, and putting their house in order in situations, ensuring that they have good understanding of your first party, understanding where all in your third party data that are you getting from, what is going to happen to it, do you have alternatives, understanding those. And from a team skills perspective, more towards a tech heavy kind of a space. It's going to be more left brained, if you will, not just about marketing as an art, but more marketing as a science. Net of this, marketing is going to get a little bit more expensive for sure. The efficiency of it is going to be less. All of these are challenges that are happening. But if you think about at a meta level, why did we even start with digital marketing in the first place? We started with digital marketing because users moved there. Like users were using digital media, and hence marketers started moving there. And if users are asking for more privacy, asking for less insight into their data, as long as you show a value to them, they're okay. But otherwise, you will have to honor their sentiments and then step back a little bit and figure out a way as to how you can provide insights and provide meaningful content for them as they're trying to search, browse, read everything on the web.
Great. So Norm says he just wants to tell you how much he appreciates the presentation and how helpful it was for helping him prepare. And so
thanks,
shout out to Norm. So Katie asks, when do you anticipate that we'll be 100% cookieless?
No crystal ball. Google said we were talking about this pre-COVID, if I remember. Our early conversations about CCPA and cookieless were pre-COVID. And now we are 2 years into COVID, and then Google just pushed out a little bit to further 2023. And the reason is simple, right? As long as there's no clear alternative, Google also stands to lose if they don't have a good enough alternative to what the users want as well as what the advertisers want. So they're trying to come up with different initiatives. I happened to read one of the questions as to also some of these privacy sandbox questions as to when will that be available. Till that gets available, I see this getting a little bit further out, and hopefully over the next 6 months to a year, we get to a better state. And if you think about the topics API or the FLOC API, which is the Federated Learning of Cohorts API, those FLOC was the first initiative to think about targeting. They put it out, they requested comments and all of that. Not much adoption. There were some questions about, is it just changing one to a different one with the same exact features, issues that are there? So they pulled it back, and now they moved to a new API called Topics. So there is momentum that's happening. This seems to be a little bit more positive than FLOC. So in that journey, I feel unless until we solve some of the privacy sandbox issues, we will not necessarily see the end of the cookieless world, at least from my view of where Google is on this journey.
Great. So we've got about 6 minutes left. So let's see if we can get another question or two in there. And going through the questions, I've seen quite a number of them on software. So one of the questions is, what software do you see on the horizon that will be helpful for the future of dealing with all of this?
I actually haven't thought about that. I maybe will come back to you to say this is what will work or what won't work. But Matt, if you have any thoughts on this, otherwise we'll get back to you.
Yeah, not really. And I did see, I think one of the other questions was around third-party software that's not Google, which kind of complicates it, because that's probably what I would have said is that if you're using Search Ads 360 and the Google stack, then everything's a little bit easier to integrate data, and there's some quite cool things that you can do. But not using that, yeah, there's a few less options, but I think we'll have to come back to you with that.
Sounds good. So, I mean, Matt, since you've taken a look through the question, are there any that, stuck out to you that you think that you guys want to take a snap at?
Yeah, I was just looking. There was one around the first-party data and prospects, and I think that one's quite interesting because there's still things like customer match within Google that you can do. So I think that's still quite important to be able to make sure you've got that first-party data and you can use that within Google Ads. And so you should still be able to use that for similar audiences so that you can get a profile of your customers or a subsection of your customers, build a similar audience off the back of that, and then you can sponsor keywords and boost them for that new audience that match the customers that you have already. So yeah, that's the key thing of the first party data, is making sure that you actually are using that feature within Google.
Heather, I just looked at one of the questions. There was one from Mendy, which was, why will paid search be limited in the use of first-party data? I was not clear in my communication. I don't think paid search will be limited in first-party data usage. It will need to be more, like your dependence on first-party data will become higher. And towards that, you can do much more with your first-party data, which you are now depending on your third-party data. So leverage first-party data as much as possible. So it's not that it's going to get limited. It's just that the way we have seen marketers use it, there's opportunity to do it better.
Perfect. One more question, and then I think we're going to close this out. So Kathy asked, is there anyone or anything, so I'm guessing resources, that you would recommend following to stay up to date on the Facebook walled garden and the Google Sandbox turtle dove? So any resources you could point them to?
I've seen the blogs and the ad resources from both Google and Facebook being super helpful. I would look at them first. And then publications like SCJ and others always have top of line content, which are summarizing it and providing an independent voice. I would look at the blogs of these sites and then SCJ and other channels for that.
I like that you threw those in there. Thanks. So I will say with that, we are, about at time, but what I want to do is, Shrikant, Matt, take a minute and let's close us out. Tell us where the people can find you and iQuanti.
Sure. So our website is www.iquantity.com. And if my email address, I don't have it here, is shrikant.lanka@iquantity.com. So we are super excited. The questions were engaging, and that kind of shows how much people are interested in this topic. And like I was mentioning, Matt and I were having a conversation before the call. This is very daunting as you think about it from a macro level, but there's some things that you can change, some things you can change. So focus on the things that you can address, and you will take it one step at a time. So hopefully, if you have further questions, reach out to us and look up our website, and potentially maybe we can even send you guys an email about what we see as key takeaways. Matt, anything from your side?
Sorry, quickly unmuting. No, I think you got it covered. Thanks.
Perfect. Well, with that, we are going to let everybody go for the day. If you've got a minute, stick around for that survey. Just gives us feedbacks, helps us make these better for you all. And we will see you at the next Search Engine Journal webinar. Have a great day. Bye.